But do you love Canada?
Friends and family said, you can't start a company, you can't run a bath. What are you talking about? You've never run anything in your life.
There's the shock of Trump, but then there's all of these Canadian oligarchs.
A war with Iran, let's just be clear, would make the Iraq war look like a walk in the park.
We should embrace internationalism, not nationalism, in the face of this nationalist wave.
It's sad that it's taken tens of thousands of dead Palestinians to get people to change their mind.
The alternative to Jewish safety through a militarized ethnostate is fighting every form of racism, including anti-Semitism, where we are, wherever we live, right?
And without further ado, let's get going. My guest, friend, co-host, the person you're really here to see tonight, is an acclaimed, award-winning journalist, columnist, activist, author of multiple international bestsellers. No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, most recently Doppelganger. She's a Guardian columnist. She's an honorary professor at Rutgers, an associate professor at the University of British Columbia. But forget all of that. She's a Zateo contributor, and she's my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the one, the only Naomi Klein.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You want to see me? Good to see you.
You too. Okay, Mehdi, let's get down to business. Canada loves you. I think you see that.
I love Canada.
But do you love Canada? Because, first of all, this is your only Canadian stop. I could not get you to Vancouver. And second of all, when we did an Unshocked episode about Canada, you almost fell asleep. He said, okay, this is literally what happened.
That's a little bit of an exaggeration.
He said he was interested in the election. I had to talk about natural resources because it's Canada, and I said the words iron ore, and I saw him nodding off.
Then you had a very interesting election. No, I love Canada. And look, I don't know why you're going on about Vancouver. We're in Toronto, which is the greatest city in Canada. That's why we picked Toronto. And when I'm in Vancouver, I'll tell them the same thing. But I'll tell you this. A year ago, I was in Toronto. The last time I was in Toronto on stage, I was with Douglas Murray.
Yes.
I much prefer to be here tonight with you in conversation. I think that's fair to say. And I've got to say, before we go any further, I mentioned earlier, Naomi has published multiple books. She's going to be doing a book signing, I should mention. At the end of this tonight, you're going to be signing some of your books. There's some books signed. So stick around for that if you want to get Naomi's books. But I've said this to you before, I'm going to say it again. When I was at university, No Logo came out, and I remember reading it cover to cover, like night one. Just No Logo. And I remember that. And if you had told that kid in university, we're going to be on stage in Canada with Naomi Klein, I say, hey, nerdy kids, your dreams can come true. That's all I'm saying. So it's a privilege to have you here, and we love having you as a Zateo contributor. And when we said we're going to do a Toronto event, it had to be me and you on stage together.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, and congratulations on your 1-year anniversary. Watching that compilation, I was really, really struck. Like, we are in the age of the newsletter. Lots of people who have left media jobs or been pushed out of their media jobs have started Substacks, and they're great, and but they're built around one person, and you did something really important and really special, which is build a media company. So I want to thank you for that, because so many people have had a voice because of that.
Thank you. And it's funny because I was tempted when I left MSNBC. Some of you heard I left MSNBC. When I left MSNBC, I was tempted to just go. People were telling me just go do a newsletter, go do your own thing. I remember friends and family said, "You can't start a company, you can't run a bath. What are you talking about? You've never run anything in your life, which is true. I have not. I'm in my mid-40s. I've never run anything. But I did have that kind of idealistic dream. I saw what people on the right are doing. The right have owned all the independent media space for so long. And I just thought, why are progressives, why are people on the left, why are people who look like me not doing it? And it can be done. If not now, when? In the middle of a genocide, with fascism at the door, it has to be done. I do want to build something. And then I managed to kind of leverage people I've known for many years, including yourself and others. I went to you guys and you had the faith in me to support this enterprise. And here we are. Like a year later, we are almost 500,000 subscribers on Substack, over 800,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're winning awards, and we couldn't do it. I mean, this is not cliche. We literally couldn't do it without you all. It is a subscriber-funded company. I don't have to worry about advertisers. I don't have to worry about corporations. I don't have to worry about owners, billionaire owners. We're funded by the people.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
Amazing. Yeah.
So, Canada.
Canada.
I want to talk about Canada, believe it or not.
Do you swear?
I swear to God I want to talk about Canada, here in Canada. Because, look, I'm a British American, so I follow the politics of those two countries pretty closely. I'm living in the US. But in the UK, one of the few countries to reject the far right in recent elections and elected a Labour government with Keir Starmer, who turned out to be not so progressive, I think it's fair to say, a little bit of a kind of a bland centrist. And I just wonder, Mark Carney was going to be the guy, and he kind of did save Canada from Pierre, what's his name?
Poilievre.
Poilievre. And I love that your far-right nationalists have foreign names. But anyways, no. That's my own gag. As someone who did French in school, I know I don't want to get involved in intra-Canada
You know a guy named Modi?
Sorry?
You know a guy named Modi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true. No, nationalism in there. I'm talking about Western chauvinists.
Yeah.
But so Carney wins, Trudeau goes away, Poilievre loses his 25-point lead. We're now in this new era where in America we're seeing Carney say stuff like, America's betrayed us, we'll never be the same again. And he looks kind of, I don't know, tough, strong, different. Is he?
Banker Daddy, will he save us? Yeah, okay, I was just looking at my phone because I pulled up, there's a satirical outlet here in Canada called, what else, Beaverton. And they had a headline recently, Carney fights off harsh US authoritarianism with slightly gentler Canadian authoritarianism. So look, I think we have to separate the voters from who they got, because certainly Canadian voters rejected Trump and what he represented, and made decisions to try to keep Canada from being the 51st state. And if you ask Canadians what that means, what makes us different, because we mainly, outside of Quebec, speak the same language, superficially, we are similar. And we are not a utopia. But there are some things that make us different. And I say this as somebody who has dual, my parents are American, they came here during the Vietnam War. It's what makes us different are policies that people fought for, people before us fought for, like universal public health care, like the fact that our mainstream media in Canada is public media to a large extent, or was. We're a less militarized society. And I want to stress, this is not, the kind of Michael Moore utopia version of Canada. We are a screwed up colonial nation. But that doesn't mean that these things don't matter and that people fought hard for them. And the trouble is, we don't need Trump to lose them. We are attacking all of these things, like the enemy's inside the house, right? So we have a kind of, what I've referred to as a sort of a sub-shock doctrine, right? Like there's the shock of Trump, but then there's all of these Canadian oligarchs. We have our own oligarchs here, very few, very powerful corporations who have used the shock of Trump and the shock of the tariffs to push for their wish list, right? So are you getting sleepy?
No.
They don't.
You said oligarch, and I perked up. I'm Bernie. I'm all about the oligarchs.
Right. So we don't want to fight your oligarchs by giving our oligarchs everything that they want.
But is that what Carney's doing?
Basically, yeah. I mean, he is fast-tracking a scramble for Canada, a scramble for Canadian natural resources. Apparently, we can't think of a single other way to run an economy other than turning nature into money. And so we're having we have bills being pushed in British Columbia, here in Ontario, that allow for mines, pipelines, all kinds of extractive projects to not have environmental reviews, to trample over Indigenous rights. They may well be unconstitutional, so we're having our own constitutional crisis. We're also having a really draconian border law being pushed on us, big military spending. It's not as bad as what's happening in your country, granted. But I think it's all the more important for there to be real alternatives to authoritarianism as it spreads around the world, or else we just bought ourselves 2 years, right? And then we'll get our own version.
Which is the worry in the UK, where Nigel Farage will eventually be prime minister if Keir Starmer keeps doing bad impressions of him, and similarly that this kind of
Well, look, these guys are winning, right? Because people want change.
But also, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. And this idea that we've seen this film before, we've seen it around the world, that you can't stop the far right by just being a kind of gentler version of it or a slower version of it. We're seeing that in the UK now, where it's a disaster. The economy's a disaster. He hasn't sorted out any kind of issues that he claimed. And here in Canada, yes, if you have a central banker as the guy who's supposed to stop the fascists, it's not very visionary, I think it's fair to say.
Exactly. So if we don't kind of get our act together and push for a real popular vision, I think I think the main reason why you'd want a Carney rather than a Poilievre is that maybe he's pushable, right? Maybe he can't just completely ignore the people who did elect him. Whereas if we'd ended up with Poilievre, I don't think we would have had that possibility. But it doesn't happen.
And Mark Carney owes Donald Trump a big thank you for that, because without Donald Trump, you would have a Prime Minister Poilievre, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely, no question. Okay, but I think we need to talk about what's going on in your country. We talked about Canada, you got through it.
Do we have to talk about the US? It's very depressing.
We're worried about environmental
it's funny
permits, and
it's funny that you say Michael Moore in the utopian view of Canada. I'll tell you what, there are a lot of Americans who see Canada as a kind of plan B, safe haven, rush there. If I'm deported by Trump, Canada's on my list of places to come. You have free healthcare and you have halal Nando's. That's all I need, right? 2 things. I'm good to go on that basis. But look, it is very depressing right now. It's super fascisty, right? Like proper, not like the pretend stuff, like the real deal, like 1930 stuff. We're talking on a day, I don't know how many of you have seen the news in the US today, where California Senator Alex Padilla was assaulted and thrown to the ground at a press conference for Kristi Noem, the ridiculous cosplaying Homeland Security Secretary, puts on body armor just to go down the street. And he tried to ask her a question, and he went forward, and they said it was a threat. And it's a horrific video. This man is a United States senator, and as he pointed out later, if they can do this to a US senator, imagine what they can do to migrants, day laborers, minority communities. And he's not the first, right? He wasn't charged or arrested today, but he was physically assaulted, thrown to the ground on camera. Yesterday, they indicted LaMonica McIver, Democrat from New Jersey, member of Congress, who was trying to enter an ICE facility for inspection. They're charging her with impeding federal officers. She could face 17 years in prison. They arrested a judge, Hannah Dugan in Wisconsin, a liberal judge. They arrested the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, then released him, but they arrested him too. Yeah. 3 out of 4 people I've just mentioned are people of color. I don't think that's a coincidence.
And all of them had, in one way or another, to do with migrant rights, right?
All to do with migrant rights, 3 out of 4, yes. Because that is what's driving these people, right? Look, at the end of the day, the Republican Party has always been a machine for transferring wealth from poor to rich. And they're doing that. They've got this budget bill going through. And I think that's reflective of all conservative parties pretty much across the Western world. At its core, you want tax cuts, right? That's the core. But what Trump and MAGA have done is also bring back that kind of white supremacist fringe into the mainstream. The Republican Party, I think someone once described the Republican Party as a kind of a conservative party with a white supremacist fringe. And Trump has turned into a white supremacist party with a conservative fringe. Yeah. And now that is what's driving, that is what is animating all these raids. That's what's animating LA. We're doing our last live event in downtown LA next week. If the venue will let us do it, because National Guard is on the street. We didn't know that would be happening when we booked that event. So, look, Naomi, you know this because we had these conversations last year. I spent a lot of time talking to people about Harris and Trump, Biden and Trump. People were upset about Gaza. We're going to talk about Gaza. But one thing I said was that, accept that the existential threat from Trump to democracy is real. And a lot of people, including on the left, including a lot of brown Muslim folks, people in my community were saying, you're exaggerating, this is hyperbole, we'll be fine, we had 4 years of him before. We're not even barely 4 or 5 months into this presidency. And the damage that he's done to democracy, to the Constitution, to the rule of law, he is doing what he said he would do, right? He is rounding up migrants, not just criminals, but people with no criminal records. He deported, and I don't want to use this word because you can't deport an American citizen. He expelled, kidnapped a 2-year-old American child and sent her to Honduras with her mother, even though her American citizen father wanted her to stay. So that is where we're at now, where American citizens, not even year 1 is done, are being thrown out of the country. So we're in a very dark place, and I think other world leaders and other countries really need to wake up to how bad it is. Because however bad you think it is sitting in Toronto, I can assure you it's 20, 30, 40, 50 times bad. And for a Canada audience, I mean, the fallout is huge for you guys, because you are right next door. And I'm not just talking about all the people coming for asylum from the United States.
Well, if they can get asylum, I mean, then this is where I think we really need to focus on what are our responsibilities as a diminishing number of countries that have not been seized by this authoritarian wave. We have a responsibility to actually be an alternative, and so
show a better way.
Exactly, and this is not the moment to introduce a draconian immigration bill. It is a moment, like I said, my parents came here during the Vietnam War, when this country actually was a sanctuary to a lot of war resistors who would have faced jail if they had stayed in the US, and they came here. It was actually really good for the country. But that hasn't happened. Like, we aren't opening our borders to people facing deportation.
That's a good point.
We're seeing universities like University of Toronto using this as a kind of marketing opportunity to be able to attract some fancy professors, which is not the same as saying, okay, you're facing deportation in the United States, come to our universities, fund our universities to be able to do that. So there's all kinds of things that we can do that I think I think we should be a beacon. I think we should embrace internationalism, not nationalism, in the face of this nationalist wave. That's what we should be doing.
And that's what, to go back to your Michael Moore utopian vision, that's how Canada's been seen by outsiders, for sure, for a long time, especially by lefty Americans. Bernie Sanders, who you know well.
You need your illusions, we understand.
Well, you know Bernie better than me. Bernie spent 2 presidential campaigns saying, look at Canada, Canada can have healthcare, why can't we have healthcare? So, I mean, the bar is very low in the United States, so don't get too cocky. But that is the problem for us, and it's interesting you make the point about cherry picking. So Tim Snyder and Jason Stanley are moving from Yale to Canada. And Jason's a good friend of mine. He's a News Ontario contributor. But you're right, that can't be the approach. It's just like, we'll cherry pick what we want from the debris and the destruction of the United States.
There are people who are in real danger, who are facing deportations because they stood up and said no to genocide. Those are the people who, I'm not saying don't, hire Jason Stanley and Tim Snyder, but there are a lot more people who are in immediate risk, and I think that has to be our priority.
It's interesting you mentioned the G word, genocide. Did you see that clip of Mark Carney when he was asked, Mr. Carney, there's a genocide, and he said, I know, that's why there's an arms embargo, and the next day he's like, I misheard.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that word, and it's not an arms embargo. I feel like Canada has had the 2 biggest gaffes of the entire war. You've got Carney saying, I misheard genocide. And then, of course, Trudeau, when he said, we need a seize, and then he stopped, I think, mid-sentence, right? Back in the day. So you guys have led the way on that, I think, quite well.
Mistakenly saying true things.
Mistakenly saying true, the definition of a gaffe, right?
Taking them back, yes.
And then taking them back. I mean, look, right now, the problem we're having in the United States right now, again, with the global repercussions, why it matters to all of us, and why when I went to the UK to do this event, the conversation inevitably came back from Keir Starmer to Trump, and I can't get away from the guy wherever I'm in the world. The problem is, even today, I'm here in Canada, and if you've seen the news again, the Trump administration has given its blessing, apparently, to Israel to launch an attack on Iran. And this was the same Trump who went to Michigan and said to Muslims in Michigan, vote for me, I'm anti-war. Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney will get you into a war in the Middle East. I'm the anti-war guy. And unfortunately, some people believe that BS. And here he is today, blessing the Israeli government, giving them the green light, basically. And a war with Iran, let's just be clear, would make the Iraq war look like a walk in the park. And if that's the road we're going down now, that's a very scary road to go. It's a road that even people like Tucker Carlson are saying, don't do it. And yet, that's where we are right now. It's very, very scary on an international level, not just a national level.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the way Gaza policy is changing under Trump?
Well, is it changing? It's a great question, because the argument was, and I'm sure many of you had these arguments in Canada and you saw they raged, we hosted a lot of these arguments at Zeteo, was in the election, could you get any worse than we already were? Right? That was the argument. In November of 2024, there is a genocide ongoing. It is a US-backed, US-armed, Democratic Party-enabled, Biden-blessed genocide. And the argument was, number one, you can't vote for people who support a genocide morally. Number two, you must punish the Democrats from a political perspective so they know there's a price for supporting genocide. And number three, maybe Trump won't be so bad. Do you know how many people told me, he's a transactional guy. He'll do a deal with MBS and Erdogan. So many people, Palestinians, some Palestinian Americans told me this. Trump was never going to make things better for the people of Gaza because he doesn't give a shit about the people of Gaza. He's made it clear that they can all leave and not come back. He said, I'm going to own Gaza. He's got this ridiculous now Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which if you are Zeteo subscribers, you'll know we just did an exclusive story with a former American soldier who went out there and pointed out the whole thing is bullshit. It's a sham, as if you didn't already know that. He is blessing the far right to take over the West Bank. And these are not my words. You listen to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who, by the way, the Canadians followed the UK and sanctioned these two, which I find so interesting. I mean, clap, yes, they should be sanctioned. But the idea that they are somehow independent of Benjamin Netanyahu, that you can sanction 2 ministers but not the rest, I've never understood that concept.
And then make it very, very clear that Israel...
It's so funny, I've debated so many of these kind of hardcore pro-Israel Zionists, and whenever you bring up Smotrich or Ben-Gvir or any of the rest of them, they say, well, they're not in the war cabinet. They're not relevant. Like the finance minister is not relevant to the government. It's like this desperation. But they've been sanctioned, and these, if you listen to them speak, they say very clearly that we're doing this with Donald Trump's blessing. Isn't it great now? We get to do whatever we want now. So they're very clear about the blessings that they've gotten for the Trump administration. And the situation now in Gaza is one where the ethnic cleansing is ongoing. It is, unfortunately, and I hate to use this word, looks inevitable if there's no source of power to stop it. They have the blessing and green light of the United States. And then, of course, at home, and this is what I want to talk to you about, and obviously Canada, again, is affected by all of this, especially on campus. I was told again last year that, well, it doesn't matter what happens on campus because it's already happening now. Well, actually, here's a very simple rule in life. Sorry to be the cynic in the room. When somebody says things can't get worse, it can always get worse. And it has in the United States. I was the biggest Trump critic, I think, in the US media. Even I didn't say he's going to begin his presidency by detaining green card holders. Right? That's what he did with Mahmoud Khalil, who a judge just said should be released by tomorrow. Mahmoud Khalil did nothing, a speech. The Americans admit, the government admits, he committed no crimes. So when you're cracking down on green card holders, permanent residents, when you're lifting up foreign students like Rumea Ozturk on her way to iftar, masked men are picking you up off the streets because you wrote an op-ed in your college newspaper saying we should divest. Right? You're in a very, very scary place right now in the first 100 days, 200 days. And that is not just going to stay on campuses. We've seen that what starts on campuses doesn't stay on campuses.
No, and I think that it's, like, if you listen to them and take them at their word, they want to go after their ideological enemies, right? And I think there are probably a lot of people in the US who think that it is only going to be migrants who are going to be targeted, and that is wrong. If we look at the authoritarian playbook, this is, you know, they're very clear. They're going after universities. They're using Gaza as the wedge. What they want to do is go after, you know, what they call the cultural Marxists, the left. You know, it is, and they're willing to shut these institutions down if they have to, because they understand that when people learn things, they become left-wing.
The reality-based universe. It's funny you talk about not going after migrants. Of course, it's a classic playbook. You go after the unpopular constituencies. It's why they're targeting the Muslims, the Mexicans, the transgender kids. It's very, very clear. And what's interesting about that is already people are doing the whole, well, I didn't expect this. I don't know if you've seen these Trump-supporting farmers who are like...
Can I just say one thing? I do, like, you were right, you were right, you are right, you know, like...
I love this conversation.
Carry on. I do think it's important to say that this is the Democrats' fault.
Oh, I agree.
Like 100%. That they put people in this absolutely untenable moral...
No, my position from the beginning always was the Democrats are to blame for the genocide, but Trump is not better, right? And that was the dilemma that people had. It was a very real dilemma.
It will
was a
get
difficult
worse.
choice.
It can get worse.
It will get worse. It can get worse. And as you pointed out earlier with the Carney example, is at least when you have quote-unquote self-styled liberals, progressives, center-left, whatever you want to call it, there is some space for pushback. Right now in the United States, why the fascism is so worrying is because the space for public pushback is not there. People are saying, well, where are the Gaza protests now? Well, a lot of people don't want to protest because they get lifted by ICE. And there are protests, but of course the people who are protesting could get lifted. Look at what's happening in LA. People are protesting, and even Democrats are saying, well, don't protest like that, protest like this. A classic. Protest like Martin Luther King protested, forgetting that all the polls show that Martin Luther King was hugely unpopular when he died. White America did not like Martin Luther King. So this bullshit about there's a right way to protest, a correct way, the way to win over the middle. But just on the kind of the regrets, you have Trump supporting farmers saying, well, we didn't know he was going to deport our workforce. We thought it was just violent criminals. And I don't know if you've seen that meme of like, I didn't know he would bite my face as the woman who voted for the face-biting leopard party, right? Like, this is who he is. And Trump's only ever said two honest things in his entire life. Number one, he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any votes. True. We've seen that with his base. He was convicted for a crime, he was reelected. The other thing he said is, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do vengeance. And he's doing it, right? He's going after all his enemies. And that is a very dangerous place to be in. And look, for people who thought, just to return to the Gaza issue, for people who thought that the policy was going to be different, again, even if you believe Trump is not a hardcore evangelical Zionist in the way that Joe Biden was, the administration is not just Trump, right? He is surrounded by people like Mike Huckabee, his ambassador to Israel, who just came out this week and said, hey, if there's a Palestinian state, it can be in Saudi Arabia, right? That's because all Muslims are the same, and they're all the same. So this is, he got Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State, hardcore, lifelong hawk, pro-Israel, anti-Iran. This is who his administration is. He's got Christian nationalist Pete Hegseth with the Crusader.
Do you hold out any hope that he could be bribed enough?
I mean, the Qataris gave him a $600 million plane. The Emiratis give him, the Saudis, my favorite. Do you see what the Saudis did when Trump went to Saudi Arabia? They parked a mobile McDonald's van outside his hotel. Like Trump refuses to eat foreign food, by the way. When he goes abroad, he only wants to eat like Big Macs and steak. He's paranoid about getting poisoned. He's also a racist, so he doesn't like foreign food, I assume. Like if I ever become leader of a world nation, which I won't, you could park a mobile Nando's truck outside wherever I'm staying. But the bribery, there is look, that was the argument I heard from a lot of Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, like, he's transactional, like, MBA. But that assumes that those foreign leaders give a shit about the Palestinians, and they don't, right? So if they are bribing him, if they are building Trump golf courses and Trump cities and Trump whatever else it is around the world, they're doing that for their own interests. They're doing that for their own protections. I think the Vietnamese managed to get out of some tariffs by calling Eric or Don or one of the fail sons over to start some business venture. So that's what they're doing with the tariffs, and that's why he's doing tariffs, by the way. There's no economics to any of this. It is about bringing in tariffs and then selectively reducing it for countries that do your bidding and private corporations that give you donations. Like that's the tariff policy. There's no macroeconomics.
It's the mafia polar world, but
as you said on Unsure.
More literal every day.
Very literal. On Gaza, though, one thing I do want to say, because I don't want to be negative all night. On Gaza, I do feel...
He was picking fights with Bill Ackman in the green room.
On Twitter.
On
On Gaza, do you feel, like we've been talking about this for a year, we launched our show together, I think back in April last year or May. Where are we? Are we in a different place from your perspective, globally and North Americanly?
I mean, I think that the atrocities, the daily atrocities are such that, and because of the extraordinary courage of Palestinians in Gaza to record, despite the ongoing, like, literal war on journalists and witnesses, some of these images are breaking through, and the deliberate starvation in particular. I think it is. I saw our friend Rula Jebrial recently. She's in Italy right now with this book that is called Genocidio in Italian. It'll come out in English soon. I interviewed her for Zeteo. She's experienced a total breakthrough. Like, she's presenting her book in the Italian Senate, and that sort of European guilt of we have to support Israel because of the Holocaust is shifting.
Even the Germans.
And it's people like Francesca Albanese who are saying it's because we were fascist that we must stop fascism in here and now. I think we see it with the huge support for the flotilla. even here in Toronto, I have these amazing parents-in-law. So we're just going to drop Stephen Lewis and Michelle Landsberg's name. Michelle is 85. Last week, she was at the first Women in Black protest in Israel in 1988, and she thought, well, feminists need to be saying no to genocide, and so she posted on Facebook 300 women in black outside the Israeli consulate on Bloor Street last week. And, this is an 85-year-old just going, I can't watch it anymore, And also somebody who grew up as a Zionist, and that changing. Stephen, a couple weeks before, they're in some sort of competition. Stephen was out there holding a sign in his old riding of Scarborough West. And so I think, when I see things like that, when I see people change their mind at that age, because, one of the things we've said is like, well, there's a generational shift, but when older people are saying, no more. And I know that that's a minority. I understand.
Unfortunately, when you look at the polling, the age demographic is insane. Like in the United States and in the UK, old people are still very pro-Israel, young people are not. As someone who's
old people need to organize other old people.
As someone who was part of changing that conversation, you, around a year ago, I think last April, just over a year ago, you did a speech outside, I think it was Chuck Schumer's home. You wrote a piece for The Guardian talking about an exodus you said we need an exodus. As a Jewish person, you wrote a piece saying we need an exodus from Zionism. I think you called it the false idol of Zionism. And you said Judaism needs to be liberated from the idea of an ethnostate that makes us feel afraid all the time. What made you want to make that kind of intervention 6 months after October the 7th?
Well, I think we have to get to the core of it. I mean, we keep asking each other, how is this possible? How is it possible that if people who suffered a genocide could be committing a genocide? I mean, this is what my Jewish friends and I in Jewish Voice for Peace, I mean, even though we've been organizing and speaking nonstop, we still look to each other and say, how is it possible? And I think we can't answer that question without understanding how trauma has been systematically weaponized by an ethnostate, and that Zionism is the ideology that turned trauma into a supremacist weapon. And so if we can't understand the discounting of the lives of Palestinian children without understanding an ideology that has indoctrinated people in this idea that you have to maintain Jewish dominance, right? So you see children as a threat. So, I wrote that speech for the second night of Passover. Jewish Voice for Peace organized a Seder in the streets outside of Chuck Schumer's home, and calling for an arms embargo. And it was a very powerful night. I mean, 300 people were arrested in act of civil disobedience. I'd be lost without Jewish Voice for Peace, and the sort of the leadership that they've offered in solidarity with Palestinians, but also saying, not in our name. This is not our Judaism. But part of that means practicing a different kind of Judaism. And I've always loved Passover because it's just so portable. It's really a diaspora technology, right? It is, you can have a Seder anywhere you can lay out a blanket and have a meal. You don't need a temple. You don't need a rabbi. It's so democratic. And it's also, I'm the youngest child in my family, and on Passover, it's the youngest child who asks the questions. And when I thought about celebrating Passover that year, I couldn't bear it, because those core values of questioning, of respecting children. I mean, that week, they had sent the NYPD in to crush the Columbia student encampment. That is how little they were interested in hearing from young people and the questions that they had for their elders. So, I don't think we get out of this horrific spiral, genocidal spiral. It's worse than a loop because it gets, we're spiraling downwards, unless we get at this weaponization of trauma through the ideology of political Zionism. We have to name it, and it is a false idol, and we have to engage with Scripture, with our traditions, and reclaim them from this sacrilege.
Wow. You mentioned the Columbia encampments, and I'm reminded of a piece that we ran when we were just brand new. We were kind of babies. Ateo had just launched, and I commissioned Jonathan Ben Menachem, who was a student at Columbia, a Jewish student and an activist. And he wrote a piece about being a Jewish student on campus at the time, because at the time, the propaganda in the mainstream media was these are all just raving anti-Semites on campus, Jewish people aren't safe. And he was like, we're doing a Seder right now in the middle of the encampment. What are you talking about? And it's still one of our most read pieces. Over a year later, that piece is still up there on the Zeteo site. So yes, challenging some of those myths and tropes and generalizations is so important. But at the same time, the other side is not just going to roll over. They are punishing speech. They are cracking down wherever they can. Again, starting with university campuses.
Well, they're
with the definition of anti-Semitism.
The end of that, the last lines of that speech, if I recall correctly, was, okay, and Chuck Schumer, we're not saying let our people go. We're saying we have already gone. And your kids, they're with us now. And
that's what scares the shit out of them.
That's what scares them, because it's true. Even Bill Ackman, who you're fighting with on Twitter, it's in their homes. It's at their.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And
he said that clearly. Like, my daughter became too lefty at heart. That's why.
Yeah,
that's why they're politicians. Yeah. Yes, that's why the campuses have become such a focus, because it's like we're losing our kids.
Because when their kids learn things, they realize that they didn't get an education from their parents. They got an indoctrination.
And all these guys, all these people are the free speech warriors. For years, they've bored us silly with free speech. Oh, it's being camp snowflakes. All that crap we heard for like a decade. And then they come to power, and all they do is crack down on speech. You can't say this. You can't say that. You can't ask a question at a press conference if you're a senator. You can't speak in a Middle East Studies department in Harvard. They fired all the staff. Harvard has taken on a new definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, which
they're trying to ban, like a speech like the one I gave could, if I was teaching at an American university.
Come after you.
Yeah.
And people in Canada have lost their jobs in universities, in the media, in politics, being accused of being anti-Semites. And two things are happening. One good, one bad, in my view. And I don't know if you agree with me on this. The good thing is those attacks are becoming devalued, and they're not working as much anymore. People are seeing through them, both on the right and the left, and it's not working as a shield. And I was mentioning to Naomi just before the show began, I debated Elon Levy, Netanyahu's former spokesman in New York last year, a truly odious individual. And if you see him on Twitter, all he does now is if you say Israel shot a child, he will retweet and say, oh, the Jews killing kids, that old trope. Anytime you mention Israel, he will pivot and say, the Jews. And you're like, but nobody mentioned the Jews. You're mentioning the Jews. That's the definition of anti-Semitism, to conflate Israel with all Jews. So people are seeing through that. That's a good thing in my view. The bad thing is, and where Levy and Netanyahu and all these people need to own this, is that by weaponizing in this way the trauma, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, you're actually devaluing the entire idea of anti-Semitism, which is not a good thing, because anti-Semites are very real, anti-Semitic attacks are very real, and therefore...
And also, by the way, the alternative to Jewish safety through a militarized ethnostate is fighting every form of racism, including anti-Semitism, where we are, wherever we live, right? So...
Which is what Jewish communities have traditionally done, right? Civil rights movement, et cetera, Vietnam War. So that's what it worries me. I mean, I wrote a piece 15 years ago for the New Statesman magazine about anti-Semitism in the Muslim community, which is a real thing. Let's not pretend it's not. As in every community still has this problem. And so I've been very, very concerned about anti-Semitism on the far right, on some parts of the left, in the Muslim community, all of that, it exists. But today now, I feel like, because of Netanyahu now, when there is blatant anti-Semitism, the anti-Semites are able to say, well, it's Israel. And I just like, what have you done here? You've screwed yourselves.
Well, Netanyahu would like nothing better than to say you're not safe anywhere but in Israel. I mean, and this is...
Sharon did that in France. Ariel Sharon and the French Jews told him to F off, saying, we are French, we don't need to move to Israel, if I remember correctly. But look, I'm hoping the debate is shifting. I'm hoping that we can win this, but with the speech crackdowns, and in the United States there's a project called Project Esther, which the Heritage Foundation, which also came up with Project 2025, has come up with, which is, and they're doing the playbook, right? That involves calling everyone Hamas, claiming there's a coordinated network behind the scenes of operatives pushing the stuff, it's not organic, banning speech, associating all criticism of Zionism in Israel with anti-Semitism. And the Trump administration is doing that playbook. And step by step, it is very, very concerning, because if you don't have free speech, then it becomes very hard to do the kind of protesting and activism that's required to stop any of this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are some signs that things are shifting on campuses where maybe people who were critical of the encampments are saying, well, we don't want people being deported. That's not what we meant. Maybe because it's Trump, there's more possibilities for coalition. I'm not sure. But yeah, that playbook, I mean, we're not safe from that playbook here in Canada either. We have a very, very right-wing Israel lobby here that would like the exact same thing to happen here, and I don't trust Carney to stop it unless he is pushed. So, yeah.
He just might not hear you when you say it. Although, to be fair, the Canadian, British, and French governments put out that statement, which was weak stuff, but better than anything they'd done before, than Trudeau or the previous British Prime Minister had done. Macron's done a 180. They said we need a two states. It's morally intolerable what's happening in Gaza. They're having this conference at the UN next week, the French-Saudi conference, which the Trump administration is now threatening countries. If you go to that conference, we'll treat that as a diplomatic act of war. They're pressuring countries not to go to this conference. As you said, the Germans came out and criticized Israel, which is insane. Germany is the most pro-Israel Western country, more than the United States. You had a bunch of different people coming out. Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli prime minister, came out and said basically it's a genocide. He said it's a criminal war of annihilation, which is genocide. So the shift is there. It's sad that it's taken tens of thousands of dead Palestinians to get people to change their minds. I was at Dulles Airport this morning, coming here, and a guy, Arab-American guy in the security line came up to me and he said, Piers Morgan changed his mind.
Oh my goodness, sorry.
I said it only took 17,000 dead kids and the starvation of an entire place, but I'll take it, right? I'll take it. If people, even if people like that are changing their minds, they know they're losing this argument.
Right, and I think we need to be very careful. It's that it's not enough to just change your mind. It's not enough to suddenly get on the quote unquote right side.
Yes.
You've been being an apologist all this time. I think it has to pivot, and this, this is what I mean by, if we're not in an authoritarian state quite yet, or, if you're standing up to Trump in the United States, you have to stand up for international law. You have to stand up for the ICJ, for the ICC. It's not, there has to be a consequence for this, right? So there has to be a process, and
You mean a strongly worded letter to Netanyahu is not going to work? I mean, the British government came out and said in Parliament, David Lammy, the foreign minister, said, this is so bad what's happening in Gaza, we're going to end all trade negotiations with Israel. We're suspending them. And then the following week, the British trade envoy was in Tel Aviv. It's speaking from both sides of the mouth, as they say. I do want to have us take some questions. From this lovely audience that is here tonight in Toronto. We're going to set up 2 mic stands here at the front. Before we bring on our extra guests, we're going to have just a chat here. Wait for the mics to come out. If you want to come forward, because there's so many of you, we can't have a roving mic. So we're going to have one here, I think, and one there. If you do have questions, comments, criticisms, feel free to come and make them from the microphone. No speeches is all I'm asking for. We will. There's always one. There's always one of you's out there is about to give a speech. And I'm telling you now, we're judging you already in advance. So don't be that person. But yes, we've talked about a lot tonight. I'm sure there's lots of stuff. I know Naomi want to talk a lot more about what's going on in the world. We mentioned Greta, by the way.
I was just thinking about politicians saying unintentionally true things. What about Trump going Israel has enough problems without kidnapping Greta Thunberg?
Without kidnapping Greta.
Give
it up for Zateo contributor Greta Thunberg. I do want to ask you something about that, but I'll save it for a moment.
For sure.
And I'll go to this gentleman here, if there's a microphone waiting for him, since he was up here first.
Thank you for a very engaging dialogue. My question to Naomi, when you mentioned that how come the victimized become how come the victims become victimized, and how we ended up on this mess. And that almost gives the impression as that the state of Israel came as a reaction to the Holocaust, as if it is a secondary sort of salvage to the Holocaust tragedy. However, the state of Israel was in the making as a concept at the end of the 19th century. The Declaration of Balfour, way ahead of the Holocaust. And the concept of we're gonna get a land which has no people, to give it to people which has no land, by definition, this is genocide. Because they knew at that time this land had people. So this, I don't buy at all that how come the victims become the victimizers. No, this wasn't a planning. This is a first-degree murder. The creation of this state, in my opinion, when I go and look at the history, is almost like a first-degree murder. It was planned, orchestrated, processed. So can you? I don't want people to take the impression that this is they just blow their way and they become basically what you call it traumatized. As this is a secondary to trauma.
It's for you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what I said was that exploitation of Jewish trauma, right? So Zionism obviously has much longer roots than the Holocaust, but it was simultaneously always a colonial project, as you say, and also a response to Jewish trauma, right? Because it was responding to pogroms and laws that stripped Jews of their rights in Europe. That's not a rationale. It was baked into the argument for Zionism from the start, and it was exploited by Britain for its colonial purposes. But no, I said trauma, not the Holocaust.
You said the C word just now, colonial, which I think is interesting because if you say colonial now, again, that's seen as anti-Semitic, it's seen as racist, it's seen as ludicrous. But what's funny is, again, to gentlemen mention history, we don't do enough history. Yeah. They called themselves colonizers and colonists, right? If you go back to Jabotinsky...
But I'm not joking this is why universities are threatening, right? Because people will read books about what settler colonialism is. They will read those original
Easier to ban the books.
They will see the connections. You know, there's a lawsuit at the University of British Columbia. UBC, where I work, is being sued by some Zionist professors who want to ban certain kinds of speech like we've been talking about. But the other thing that they're calling for is for the university to no longer make land acknowledgements, right? So they understand actually that young people learning about colonialism in Canada helps them see it in Palestine, right? And that ability to make connections across geographies and issues is actually the most threatening thing of all when Israel becomes de-exceptionalized, because the whole argument for its existence is the exceptionality.
Yes. Well, the Germans, the post-war state is built on one of their reasons for existing, they call it, is to support Israel, right? That, and even recently the Anti-Semitism Commissioner in Germany said, well, that doesn't mean we can't be able to say anything critical of Israel. And it's funny, by the way, you mentioned kind of right-wingers, you made that very good joke many times. Like, I love it about universities and learning. I'll give you one example, one of my favorites, a wonky joke from me. Louise Mensch was a conservative MP in the United Kingdom. She moved to the US, became very MAGA-ish for a time, and then anti-MAGA-ish, whatever. I don't know where she is on the spectrum now. But I remember when she was on Twitter one time, she said, anyone who comes in my timeline and says Zionism this, Zionism that, they're blocked because they're an anti-Semite. And someone replied, even Theodor Herzl. And she said, yeah, him too. Which I thought was hilarious. Just like, okay, this is the kind of ignorance we're dealing with. Let's go from side to side. So, lady here.
Hi, my name is Jordy. I'm a huge fan of you both, so this is really exciting.
Sorry, I can't hear you. So if you want to speak into the mic.
Oh, sorry. So I'm also Jewish, and one of the things that's been very difficult for me is not only seeing how anti-Semitism is being weaponized by our governments to push a very right-wing agenda, but how also our Jewish organizations, synagogues, day schools have been cheerleading alongside them. And our symbols, the Star of David, the menorah, are very closely linked to what Israel has been doing. So my question is kind of, how do we recover our, all these values that I think are very important to Judaism have been sort of warped, and how does the image of Jewish people, how are we gonna...
Well, look, I think we organize, and I think a lot of that's been happening, and I want to make sure we get to more questions. But I would just shout out some of the amazing students at University of Toronto who had a very long, very powerful encampment and did a lot of that work. And independent Jewish voices here in Canada. We've got to organize and build our own institutions.
Gentleman here, thank you.
My name is Ali. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for funding Zeteo, because I was finding it hard to watch your show on MSNBC on Canada, so I had to go on VPNs and everything. But my question is, you said rightly so that the U.S. does not care about Gaza, right?
The U.S. does not care about Gaza.
Yes, about Gaza. My question is, how did Israel get the US to care about itself, even to its own detriment sometimes? And if it's the Israeli lobby, how did they do it, and what lessons can we learn from them?
Well, I mean, I'll take that one briefly. I'll say, look, there are multiple factors pushing America's support for Israel. AIPAC is, of course, one of them, but it's too simplistic to reduce it just to the pro-Israel lobby. There are also military interests, there are economic interests, there are geopolitical interests. I mean, if you talk to someone like Noam Chomsky, and I've had the luck to speak to him a few times on camera, and he's not well, so we send prayers and thoughts to Noam right now. But someone like Noam Chomsky would say, no, it's got nothing to do with the pro-Israel lobby. It's actually much more to do with US empire and Israel being a satellite. All of those there are many arguments about the support, but just to highlight what you raised about the lobby issue, I do think pro-Palestine folks should be better organized and better funded and be more savvier at politics and make sure they get their foot in the door and their face into people's face. I get all that, but I don't become your enemy. I don't think we want to become AIPAC, right? They're not good people. They lie. They're racists. I don't think we need to do that to win the argument. But we certainly, I mean, I tweeted today, or yesterday, I've lost track because I tweet so much, that if there is a war between Israel and Iran, and the Iranians respond, as is likely, by attacking US bases in Iraq, which is why they've now pulled non-essential staff out of Iraq yesterday, the United States government did, and Americans die, the blood of those Americans is on Netanyahu's hands, right? You're right to make we have to be able to make the case to American and European governments that supporting Israel is not in your interest, not in your financial interest, not in your political interest. Like the US is going on and on about Doge and saving money. Like you send $3.5 billion a year to a state that is completely ungrateful and using it to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. So I do think those arguments have to be made. They're not going to be easy to make, because, as I say, the US has been doing this for 8 decades, so you can't turn around the supertanker that quickly. But I would say, again, note of optimism. Pew Research found recently, for the first time, was it Pew or Gallup, I can never remember, the big poll found that for the first time since they began polling this subject, a majority of Americans now have a negative view of Israel. That's the first, 52%. So that's the first time that's happened. And I have nothing against ordinary people in the country who are doing what they're doing. But as a country, it is a rogue state right now. Just as we would have negative views of Russia, that doesn't mean we hate all Russians. The same should apply to Israel. Israel should be a pariah state, given what it's done to the UN, just as a starting point. Gentlemen here.
Hi. My name is Carlos. First, Naomi just finished listening to your audiobook last week. It's so moving. Doppelganger.
Everybody buy Doppelganger.
Yeah. I don't know, Ahmed Fuad al-Khatib. He seems to be popping up, especially from Jewish friends of mine who are very silent about what's going on, but they seem to be cheerleading him and kind of negating what he's saying about Israel, but really, cheering what he's saying about how bad Hamas is, but then he's also really painting with broad brushstrokes, saying that the student protest movement is all Hamas.
Yes.
What do you think of this guy? Is he controlled opposition? What's his story?
I missed who it was.
I forgot his full name.
Ahmed Fuad al-Khatib.
Yeah, so
Realigned for Palestine.
Look, I don't want to get too personal with people I don't know him personally. He's reached out to me in the past. He's now based in DC. I did watch him on YouTube recently. Look, there's always people like that, right? I'm not questioning his intentions. He may be very well-intentioned. He's a Palestinian from Gaza. He's lost family in this war in Gaza, dozens of people. But his focus, I think, is in the wrong place, right? To use the line from someone who was debating him on YouTube, if you're busy policing the oppressed, not the oppressor, you are wasting your energy and time right now, right? I have no doubt that Fatah has a lot to answer for. Hamas has a lot to answer for. Palestinians have made many, many mistakes, both in the territories and in the diaspora. But if that's where your attention is, while kids are being killed hourly in the Gaza Strip, then I think your moral goals are in the wrong place, your moral priorities are in the wrong place, your political priorities are in the wrong place. And there is always this school of thought, which some people, and look, every conflict has this, every diaspora has these people, which is like, if we're nicer to the oppressors, then we'll get what we want. And the idea that if Palestinians, this whole, I wrote about 15 years ago, I wrote an article about where's the Palestinian Gandhi. There's always like, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? There were loads. You killed them, right? You killed a lot of the Palestinian Gandhis, a lot of them in prison. So Marwan Barghouti, for example, who is in prison right now. The problem is, of course, that nobody believes that Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and the rest of those guys are going to go, the Palestinians are all non-violent now. It's time for a two-state solution. If you believe that, I have a certificate from Trump University to give you. Gentlemen here.
Hi, Mehdi and Naomi. My name is Billy. Huge fan of you guys. I'm pretty anxious because I'm a fanboy. My question, thank you. My question is, Naomi, you mentioned about focus on, I guess, international like solidarity as opposed to focusing on nationalism. Even though it's so bleak right now as genocide, how, in a post-genocide world, like post-Gaza genocide world, how do you envision such solidarity, global solidarity? Thank you.
How to engage in global solidarity?
How do you envision this working, I think he's asking.
Well, I think we have to be very clear about our principles, what it is that we believe in. This is why, I talked about needing an exodus, right? I think we all need the rise of ethnonationalism is global, right? Israel is an extreme example, but they have plenty of company, right?
Yep.
And so I think we need to recognize these patterns, and if we recognize the threat of ethnonationalism in India, in the United States, in Hungary, in Italy, then we have to get very clear on what it is that we believe in, what our core principles of, absolute equality and the separation of these ideologies from the countries that we live in. And that to be a basis on which to organize and really fight for the international humanitarian legal infrastructure that has some teeth behind it. If there's one good thing about what Trump is doing, exiting the international stage means that the US isn't there watering down every single agreement, like thinking about climate, for instance, without whether the Democrats are in power or the Republicans, the US is always a force in those negotiations, taking the teeth out of every agreement, making it meaningless. But so now we can, fight for real internationalism,
Work around the US.
Yeah, like Omar Barghouti talks about, we should force the UN to live up to its promise, right? We need to reform it in radical ways, get the veto out, right? We don't have the democracy that we were promised on so many fronts. So I'm stressing this to a Canadian audience because it's one of the things that we tell ourselves about who we are, that we have, here we are talking about spending 2% of our GDP on weapons. How about living up to our promises for foreign aid,
You've also got a lot of countries in the global south that are doing great stuff, and I've got to do a shout out to the South African government, which has stood its ground again and again. Trump just kicked out the ambassador, but a good friend of mine, and they've stood their ground. And the Hague Group, which is meeting in Colombia next month, there are really interesting initiatives going on in the global south as well, which Israel, and not just Israel, but other ethnostates are petrified about. Gentleman there, thank you.
Hey, so just to give context, given the nature of the news that we're talking about, everything that's going on in Gaza right now, and the fact that, Ms. Naomi, you've written books about events and situations that are taking place right now, but the books that you've released were a decade ago, so it's almost like nobody's listening or nothing's changing. I guess my question is, what is it that you use to encourage yourself to keep doing this every day? Because it's really, and that goes to you too, sir, is how? Because it's not a day that goes by when we're not seeing terrifying images online. So what's the advice that you have for us to go on each day? It's really hard.
I know people in their 80s who've been fighting the good fight their whole life, so I don't feel like I have a right to complain about having, and I also don't have any regrets. Some of my most joyful moments are moments in movement, in organizing with other people, where you catch these beautiful glimpses of another way of living. A lot of people felt that in the encampments, really felt like, wow, this is the future we want. This is like a portal to another world. And we get out of that isolation. I felt, I described that Seder in the street. That was another one of those moments. So it's really my comrades that keep me going, and those beautiful sort of effervescent movement moments where we really live our values and we can see that there's another way of being. You know, we're told that that we're just these sort of selfish creatures just looking for our own benefit, but we really are social creatures. So, but the other thing is that, as you said, everything is on the line right now. And, you know, I wrote a piece called End Times Fascism with my friend Astra Taylor about how we really have to reckon with the fact that our elites don't believe in any kind of future. Like, they've given up on this world, on this realm, whether they are literal end-timers, like you mentioned, Mike Huckabee, you know, who support Israel not because they care about Jews or Israelis, but because they actually believe this is that having the Israelites return to Greater Israel is what you need to bring the Messiah and have the faithful be hoovered up to their golden city in the sky, you know? And that's kind of like, you know, the religious version of what Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are doing with their bunkers and their spaceships, right? They're just building their rapture down here.
I can't believe it took 1 hour, 15 minutes to get a Musk reference. Oh, I feel good about that. God, isn't that good that he's no longer as central to our lives as he was? Thank God. Basically,
we're all tired, but we have to fight anyway. Because we can't leave it to these fascists.
I'm super tired. I've not slept for over a year. I do it, in answer to your question, with lots of chocolate cake and ice cream, which is a super unhealthy way to get through it, but it works. Look, the simple thing is I'm a very competitive person. I hate losing. So that is what keeps me going. The idea that I would let them win is something I cannot endure. I don't let my kids beat me at Uno, right? The idea that I'm going to let Bill Ackman or Elon Levy or whoever it is win the argument on this, I literally wrote a book called Win Every Argument. So that is what keeps me going. Competitive spirit. Camaraderie, yes, but also some healthy competition. Don't let them win. There's more of us than there are of them.
That's a movement ecosystem you just saw there.
We all have our approach to the same end goal.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for being here in Toronto. Naomi, I wanted to ask you about...
I think I know that voice.
I do. It's Samira.
Hi.
Samira Muhyiddin, right?
I wanted to come back to the encampments because you were there at the University of Toronto on May 10th, 2024, and you spoke beautifully at the Seder that you were present at. And when I interviewed you, you made a reference to the students that were fighting apartheid South Africa on that same campus and how the University of Toronto was dragged kicking and screaming towards divestment. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about that through line of solidarity and the work that the students did during your time at the University of Toronto. If you could speak a little bit to that, and then also about solidarity, the way that those students created that space inside, and then the way the media here portrayed those same students.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you were there every day and just did such incredible reporting, and we're so grateful to you. You know, just pick up on the last piece, and I'd be interested in Mehdi's take on it too. It's the lying about these, you know, these students are the moral conscience of our countries. You know, they're doing exactly what they were raised to do. That they, you know, they learned the stories, and they wondered, how could people have allowed the Holocaust to happen? How could people have allowed that genocide to happen? What is my moral responsibility in this moment? And it stepped into it. And no, they weren't perfect. No one's perfect. I mean, God, I was not a perfect undergrad. You know, but the core of it, that impulse, and to be lied about at scale, that's not something we experienced when we were fighting apartheid in South Africa in the late 80s. You know, there was resistance. I was very lucky to arrive just at the very end of that struggle, so I thought activism was really easy. The first protest I went to ended apartheid. I was like, hello. But you know, that's the real answer to the question, why do I keep doing it? I just keep waiting.
You're so successful.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You did it once, you can pull it off again.
No, but I mean, what is the real implication of this smearing of the impulse of that moral reflex that young people have exercised, and to have the universities themselves that are entrusted with preparing them for the future, who they're paying exorbitant amounts of money, betray them in that way. I worry about the implications of that for the future.
We should be worried about that because, as you know, if universities are screwing us over and screwing kids over, then we're in a lot of trouble. I do have this mental image now of F.W. de Klerk saying we must end apartheid. Naomi Klein went to a protest in Canada, and he sends out the memo, and South African apartheid falls. But the lying,
Occupied Robert.
But the lying. By the way,
straw.
let me just do a plug for Zeteo. The lying is what made me want to go and start a media company, because I'm so fed up of the brazen up is down, black is white, hot is cold lying. You know, the Department of Homeland Security spokeswoman today shared a video of Alex Padilla, senator, being assaulted, and she goes, well, he didn't identify himself. The video starts with him going, I'm Alex Padilla, senator. She shared the video, and it's the George Orwell line, like the last diktat of the party was to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears, and that is what MAGA is based on, that is what Zionism is now based on. They just, I saw a headline on News Nation, Chris Kromer showed the other day, China behind the protests. They cannot bring themselves to acknowledge that maybe young people don't like watching videos every day of kids being dismembered and mutilated and beheaded. No, it must be an outside actor. It must be an ideology. It must be some foreign funding. And the lies that are being told right now are doing massive damage, and the only way we stop that is by pushing back through independent media and supporting independent media. And I don't just say that because I want you to subscribe, which I do, but because it's true. We have a special guest waiting in the wings, so...
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.